Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And I've got Penny Williams with me today. Penny, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to be a toddler whisperer. It
I
just
can
sounds like so much fun.
I can teach you. You probably already are. We are gonna have we're gonna go real light today, light in air quotes, because when before we hit record, you were telling me you live in near Asheville, North Carolina, in an area that was not the hardest hit by Hurricane Helene, but that was hard hit. And what I asked you before we hit record is, would it be all right to record this episode where we talk about external stressors that impact parents who are raising neurodivergent children? And
Mhm.
you said yes, so I'm glad about that. I'm gratified to do that for people who are, we've got an election cycle coming up. We've got uncertainty of all kinds everywhere, which, by the way, is true all the time, right? There's always
Mhm.
uncertainty everywhere. And there are times when the degree of uncertainty feels like kind of extra. So, do you want
Very
to
much
just
so.
briefly tell us, like, how you were impacted by Helene and kind of what's been happening down there?
Yeah, yeah. And make sure that I keep it brief because it's really hard to be brief about this because there's so much to tell
Yeah.
because it's so unimaginable. Like my husband and I have had this conversation over and over since Celine came through Asheville that this is something only like a sci-fi movie writer would dream up. Like it's really horrific. And I am so fortunate to live in this pocket of town where our home was not flooded. We got power restored in 4 or 5 days instead of 2 to 3 weeks. We had even internet restored within, I think it was 2 weeks or just over 2 weeks. Um, no phones. That was like the really difficult piece. One of the really difficult pieces is that we had no cell service anywhere in the region. We had no way to, or people like my parents live here, my sister and her husband live here. I had no way to contact them and see what was going on for them. And because we lived in an area where like there were down trees everywhere and you could not get very far for a couple of days, that um, we only saw what we saw and what was happening like in Asheville. Like I knew that Biltmore Village would flood. We were here in 2004 when two back-to-back hurricanes came through and things flooded. We were actually renting a house that flooded at the time. So we knew to expect that. But there was no way to expect that this was a 1,000 plus year flood, which is what they're saying. There was no way to expect that there would be 1,000 landslides in Western North Carolina in a 24-hour, 48-hour period. Um, there was just no way to ever
Yeah.
imagine this level. We know that there are areas here that flood. We've experienced it, we prepare for it. But the original super struggle was that there was no communication and we didn't prepare. Like we knew our house couldn't flood because we're way uphill from the river, like way uphill. And so we didn't like go out and buy water. We
Mm.
didn't even stock the fridge or the freezer. Like we had maybe a meal's worth of food and a couple of snacks. Like we were very ill prepared. And
I'm gonna stop you there
yeah, yeah.
because, and here's why, not because I don't want to hear more, but I want the listeners to just check in with themselves because
Mm-hmm.
as I'm hearing you talk, I am noticing that my chest is getting tight, my breathing's getting shallow, and the reason I'm pointing this out is because it is important to
Mm-hmm.
notice what is happening in your body when your mind is going through stress,
Yeah,
right? Because
100%.
we tend to dissociate. And again, those things are good survival instincts when we are in a life or death situation. But when we're listening to a podcast, driving a car, or doing laundry, that is not a life or death situation.
Right, right,
So
right.
we're going to
So take a breath right
take a
now.
deep breath right now. Feel your butt in your chair or your feet on the ground or your hands, whatever they're touching, and just check in with yourself. The other reason I'm pausing here for this is because I imagine, and let's do a little bit of a pivot here, that you engaged in some of these practices. Well, you tell me when. Like, obviously, there's
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
acute phase of what happens in which adrenaline is flying. You're like, oh my God, what fresh hell is next?
Hmm.
There's kind
Hmm.
of the middle where you're assessing damage, and you tell me if you're coming sort of out of into the third act of this. But so tell me about strategies maintaining oneself, and
Yeah.
particularly since you are very much the executive function portion of your family, as I understand
Yes.
things,
100%.
and you
I
have
am the
children,
executive function of my family. I have
and
two young adult children who live here and
yeah,
were here during this, one of which is neurodivergent, the other of which has extreme severe anxiety. Um, yeah, and it's funny as you were asking people to like check in with their bodies because they might be triggered. I was realizing that that part of the story energizes me, which is weird, right? But it was because I was in survival mode when that was happening
mm-hmm.
and I had tons of adrenaline. I did not panic. I did not cry. I did not freak out. My nervous system went into overdrive, right? It was like, okay, we got to deal with this. But it was in that way that triggers the adrenaline and you just go and you do and you don't feel yet, right? And so like those first few days where we were just trying to figure out like where to get food, where to get water we could drink. We were actually drinking the water first few days because there was no communication. So we didn't know we were supposed to be boiling it. Thankfully, we were okay and that didn't cause more problems. But yeah, like that. And I didn't necessarily recognize that I was like having this adrenaline rush and I was in survival mode. Like I was just going through the motions
Mm-hmm.
and making sure we were okay.
And that's normal, right? Because that's part of the,
Hmm.
I think of it as
Hmm.
a fight response, right? In some ways, it's like,
Yeah.
I got to
Yeah.
get shit done. Like, this has to
Yep.
happen now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if we do that for too long, fast forward to the story you just told me about Target, we will, we will
Yeah.
go into Target
Yeah.
and look at the water. And,
Hmm.
well, you tell me, you tell us the story.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we found food. We stood in a lot of lines. We split up. My husband went in one car, my daughter and I went in another because we had no communication. So she was not comfortable being separated. And so, I'm just trying to like make sure everybody feels okay, right? Because again, I'm that calm anchor, right? And so I still felt like I had to show up as the calm anchor, but I wasn't thinking about it because I've done this work for myself for so long that it was natural for me. Even in a disaster, it was natural for me to say, what do we need to do? We're going to do it. I'm going to stay calm because that's the best way to get it done.
Yeah.
So fast forward a few days, um, we don't have communication. We don't have internet. I can't remember if the power was on this day or not. I want to say that it probably was because it was on at Target. um, and I was still trying to do a summit. I was in the midst, this happened 3 days before my kickoff masterclass for my Anxiety SOS Summit. And everybody would have understood had I postponed, but I needed to do it for me because it is like 50% of the income for my family. So here I am in this disaster with no internet, but I work online and I need to get this done. Right. And so it was like this storm of crazy. So I had power and water. My sister down the street had no power and no water, but she had cell phone internet.
Mm.
So every day I was going to her house and trying to work by hotspotting my computer, right? And she and her husband were coming here and getting showers and filling up their water jugs, right? Like it's a whole thing. It's bonkers. Um, And that was only possible after her neighborhood, everybody with a chainsaw got out and cleared the 8 or 9 trees on this tiny little road. So fast forward to Target. I was taking a break one day working on the summit of her house. Every day I had to just like get up and leave for a little bit because I was sitting there for like 10 hours a day stressing. The internet wasn't great, like all the things, right? And so my daughter and I went and I was like, let's just go to Target. Like I hear Target's open, they at least have a few things, and I could use some chocolate. Like this is what we were doing. And we walked in, and my first emotion was like a, a sigh of relief. It felt normal. When I first went in, I grabbed a cart, I'm walking in, everything looked the same, right?
Mhm.
It felt really normal. And I just had this sort of breath of relief from that. Like I needed that little hint of normalcy. But then as I turned the corner and looked down the main aisle, it's pallets of bottled water and pallets of ramen noodles all the way down. Oh, see, now I feel it in my
Me
nervous
too.
system. Just
Yeah.
hit me.
Yeah.
And yeah, oh, the chills. As we were walking through, like at this point, I had been going to access internet enough that I knew that there were many people who lost their life. There were many people who lost their homes. Our infrastructure was destroyed. Our water system was destroyed. Every water plant, except for the one that we happened to be on, in this town was destroyed.
Mm.
Um, and so I knew these things, but they didn't yet feel really real because I was still in my bubble.
Mm.
But going into Target and seeing pallets that were 5 feet high, you couldn't see over. I couldn't see over them because I'm very short. And you couldn't like get around, you're going like all the way to the end of the row of Target to
Mhm.
turn around and get something on the other side because the water was so needed, because easy food was so needed
Yeah.
that it was piled up everywhere. And I didn't realize at first that it was sort of hitting me, that the adrenaline had really worn off by this time.
Mhm.
And I got about, I don't know, 4 or 5 rows back, and I started to cry. And I was trying to hold it in, right? Because you're in Target, and, I've got a kid with me who needs co-regulation in anxious times. And so I was really trying to like not be the person walking around Target and crying. um, and every time I turned a new corner and there was some reminder, like it would hit me again. And by the time we got to the back where the chocolate was, where I was, like where I was like, this is the medicine I need right now,
Yeah.
I couldn't breathe. I really felt like I couldn't catch my breath.
Mhm.
I was starting to feel dizzy. And I was like, I think I might pass out.
Mhm.
And this is not good. And thankfully, I've been doing this focused work on the nervous system for a long time in my work, but also I've been on this journey to understand myself and my thinking, and to be, not have that victim mindset. If
Mhm.
I hadn't have done all this stuff over the last 7 or 8 years, my gosh, this would have been a really different experience.
Well,
Would not
and
have been able to
pause.
hold it together. Yeah.
Yeah, and pause. If you are someone who's listening to this, who is like, number one, yeah, I've felt that way, or I feel that way a lot, and you haven't yet found the strategies or the way into connecting, with your body and breathing and all of these strategies. If you have a hard time using strategies, this is your prompt to get on it, because,
Hmm.
and here's why, and you can talk, I know you and I could talk about this all day long. If
Yeah.
you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Hmm.
If you are depleted on the regular, we're using this hurricane situation as an extreme example of stressors that occur, right?
Yeah.
But if you are freaked out on the regular and you're not doing things to address that, that's going to rub off on your parenting, and that's going to rub off on your child. And what it does is increase misbehavior, in air
Hmm.
quotes,
Hmm.
increase their stress levels, contribute to an environment that is less conducive, not more conducive to them staying regulated, because you're
Hmm.
not regulated.
Yep.
which is not the same as saying you have to be regulated all the time, because clearly you were not in this situation.
Human beings are not, right?
Human
Yeah.
beings are not. So, but just all that to point out, you've been doing this work, and in these moments of extremity is, on a daily basis, whatever, you turn right instead of left, you're not the person who's freaking out. But there are certainly people who have not done this practice who are freaking out when they turn right instead of left, and really getting on their own cases about it. Um, I think I just lost you, Penny. Where'd you go? Come on back. There you go.
Okay, there
You
you are
froze for a second.
for a
But
long time.
yeah,
It's my
but
internet.
oh, that's okay because I was talking and you weren't.
I
Go
yeah, I
ahead.
hope you edit. I mean, this is what happens every time I have to get online now. Like it's great, it's great, it's great. And as soon as I have to connect with somebody else and do something, then it starts
Yeah,
cutting in and out.
yeah.
Um,
But this
right.
practice, it's meaningful. It means something. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
you started to cry in Target. You realized you weren't going to be able to sort of stuff it for a later date. And so what
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm good at stuffing things for a later date. Let's be real. Like I'm pretty good at that at this point in my life. And I just couldn't. Like I couldn't not that I melted down or exploded. I was able to manage that. And I just stopped. I told my daughter, I need a second here. Can we just stand here for a minute? And I did some breathing and I recognized what was happening. And if I hadn't have been able to do that, my anxiety would have taken over and I would have freaked out about potentially passing out
Mhm.
because my brain does that. And so being able to understand my nervous system and what was going on was everything, right? It really helped me to manage that moment and get through it and not necessarily be okay. Like I was still like, this is hard and this is emotional. And part of the real struggle that I've had over the last 3 weeks and a few days since this happened is an enormous amount of guilt and an enormous amount of empathy. I have way too much empathy. And, it's great to be really empathetic, but sometimes it's overwhelming and it's a lot. And that was part of the struggle for me. I already knew that I was okay. I was safe. My house was safe. I could communicate in some way or another. What we were doing was leaving the house to find communication, but we knew we could do that.
Yeah.
But I was so overwhelmed for what happened to everyone around me that I couldn't handle it. My nervous system couldn't handle it. But if you think about what if my experience there was a kid, one of our kids, right? How would that have looked? How would that have played out? If it was my kid, it would have been a meltdown at a young age. Not now as a young adult, but as an elementary age kid, it would have been a crisis, a big, loud, horrible struggle of a crisis in the middle of the store, right?
Followed
And I,
by, yeah, and if we go even out of the store, followed by insistence on extreme sameness of the at home,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
insisting on that cup, not this cup, things that don't appear to matter, right? That just look super rigid. But when
mm-hmm,
you are in this kind of stressed environment, and by the way, many complicated kids live in a stressed environment
yes,
that's not
mm-hmm,
objectively stressed, but it's stressful for them.
stressful for them.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's how they're managing. And so, yeah, that does look, you are a fully cooked human with a lot of skills. So if you start to have a meltdown, you breathe through it, you sit down, you take care of yourself. If you're
Mm-hmm.
7, you don't have that. You don't have those
No,
skills, you don't have
no.
that experience. You're freaking
Or
out,
the
and
self-awareness
or
even
self-awareness. That's
to,
right.
yeah, right, to recognize. And as you were just saying that, it just struck me that need for normalcy that I was having is really where our kids get rigid, right? They need to know what to expect. They need something that feels um like something that has felt good in the past, right? And that's where that rigidity, I think, comes from in those instances. Um, yeah, little aha there for me today.
Yeah. Yeah. as you go forward, you started to talk about the guilt a little bit.
Hmm.
And I'm not, you didn't say it this way, but I want to frame it this way. The empathy piece. We can, there is such a thing as over empathizing
Oh, there is. Let me tell you.
to your own detriment.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to pull any punches here. We, especially women, anybody who's listening, we are allowed to take care of our own damn nervous systems,
Hmm.
even if other people are suffering.
Yeah.
We are allowed. Because again, if I'm martyring myself and my nervous system on the altar of helping people who are less fortunate than me in some whatever objective, which isn't even objective term, right? Then I am doing everybody a huge disservice. I
Hmm.
hope you can hear how strongly, like if you're not watching this on YouTube, because I'm about to burst into tears, like this is really important, you all. Really, really important. Do you want to add on here?
I mean, it's everything. It's crucial. If you are, again, you can only pour from a cup that has something in it, right? You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. And our culture is you are a good parent if you sacrifice all of yourself for your kid. And the opposite is true. Not that you're the worst parent if you do that, but you are not showing up as your best self and being the best parent that you can be if you do that. And so, yes, you have to take care of yourself. And what I was, the brain fog just hit.
Mm-hmm. That's
I
okay.
had an idea as you were talking, and I thought I still had it, but now it's gone.
That's okay.
I'm so
I want to
sorry.
jump in here. No, 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 because I want to jump in here because first of all, brain fog is real in stress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So some self-compassion, right? And I'm not talking
Yep.
to you because you have this, you know, you have this practice, but for the listener, self
Sometimes.
sometimes I'll give you some compassion, some grace, extra sleep, extra
Hmm.
nutrition if you can get it, or supplementation if you need it. Like back to basics in stress. And that's for kids too. Put them to bed earlier than you think they need to. Because when you're navigating, think about any time that you have traveled overseas. It's a different language. You don't know how to get around. The place is unfamiliar. It's exhausting. My cousin was just
Hmm.
visiting over the weekend. She went to bed at 9 o'clock. She's from Germany. She was speaking English all day. She went to bed at 9 o'clock every day that she was here because she was so tired.
Yeah.
Stress is like visiting a foreign country, right? You were mentioning before we hit record, like you went to turn down a road that you know you can't drive down, but you're so used to driving down that road that you
Hmm.
forgot it's still closed.
Hmm.
That's mental work.
It is. It is. And every time I leave my neighborhood, there are reminders everywhere.
Yeah.
Even in my part of town where the road still exists and the water system is sort of working, it's not safe to drink, but it comes out of the faucet. Like there's so many down trees. There have to be tens of thousands of down trees in the region
Yeah.
from this, everything just uprooted. And you can see where they were cut to open the road, and it's on both sides. Like it's just everywhere. And it is literally exhausting to go anywhere and do anything now
Yeah.
because emotionally,
Mhm.
I just go through the ringer over and over again with that empathy for other people because I'm okay, right? Physically, I'm okay. Emotionally, I'm not there yet. And I think it's going to be a long time. Like everybody who lives here will never be the same again.
Mhm.
This has changed all of us
Yeah.
in one way or another. Um, and I remembered, I think, what I wanted to say earlier, if I can,
Yeah.
which is that comparison piece.
Yes.
And this has been an all my life problem. Social anxiety amps this up for me. I have always compared myself to everyone else too much. and then I, shame and blame myself from it, right? I don't measure up. It's something that I've worked on for a long time. It's not nearly as bad as it was, but that has really come up in this because there are people who, like, there are whole families who washed away and died in their home, and it was not their fault. The water came up so fast here. Like, there's so much misinformation out there about, well, if you knew the road was going to flood, like, there was none of that possible in what happened here. It was 1,000-year flood. Um, but it's really hard not to compare where we are and what happened to us with what other people are going through. Like
Yeah.
right now in my county, there are thousands of people standing in line for a hot meal.
Yeah.
There are thousands of people standing in line to shower in a truck.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't know when they will have a home to live in again. Okay, I'm going to get upset. And that's not my experience, but oh my gosh, my heart bleeds for them. And I don't want that to happen to them. And I also cannot turn a blind eye to it. I am wired for bearing witness. I watch every documentary, I read every story. I have to know.
Mm,
And my daughter's like, why do you do this to yourself? And I'm like, I'm not doing it to myself. Like, it's a need that I have
mm.
because I care so much about other people and their experience. And also, I'm a student of behavior. It's really interesting to me. And so that, fuels that need too. But
Yeah.
like, and so I want to drive to the hard parts of town and see it. I want to know what other people are going through. But
Mhm.
what happens is I'm also taking on all that stress, not the same level that they have, but I have to remind myself that just because my struggle isn't as big, maybe, from this natural disaster, it doesn't mean I'm not struggling. And it's been very, very hard. I'm like, this is something I teach, but it has been enormously hard for me
It's
to remind myself of and live right now.
it's a big challenge. I think it's something that comes up regularly when we're talking about complicated kids, neurodivergent kids, right? Where everybody else is seeming to have one experience and you're having a different experience, and you keep going like, oh, what
Mm-hmm,
about them? And
mm-hmm.
then somebody else down the road, well, their kid has this, and you're like, oh, that's so much worse. But and humans do this, right? We want to like rank ourselves
Yeah,
and we want to know where we fit. Where do we fit? Well, if I know you teach this, you fit inside yourself, right?
yeah.
You are the only one who's here to live your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we should, we are best when we get about living our own experiences. And that's sometimes hard to do. It's funny because I have the
Mm-hmm.
exact opposite strategy that you do. And that's why I'm going to mention it here, which is when I am stressed by events in the news, for example, I do not pay attention to that because it prevents me from accessing the parts of my brain that I need in order to do my job with kids and
Yeah,
families.
yeah.
And I have friends who do not understand that because they're wired differently from me,
Mm-hmm.
and who are like, I can't believe you don't pay attention to current events. And I have to tell them, like, listen, I can't do what I do if I'm bogged down in this narrative of all of these, terrible things that are happening. And so it's just, again, that's my way. It's not the right way.
Yeah.
You've got a way. And I think
But
what
I
I want
actually
to,
do
yeah, go
that
ahead.
with the news. Like, I turned
Yeah,
myself off from current events a while ago.
yeah,
There are a lot of things going on. There's so much, the uncertainty. The uncertainty just kills me because I also have a need for control. Thank you, anxiety. And
mhm,
so, when things could be so, so bad and I can't control them, like, I'm like, oh, I can't. And so, yeah, I have not invested myself in news and current events for quite some time. So I think, you can pick and choose. What do you want to take in more? What feeds you
yeah,
and what doesn't? What robs you of your energy? I was just doing a master class on mindset, and we talked about energy. Like, are you wasting your energy worrying about things that you cannot influence whatsoever,
yeah,
like changing the brain that your kid has, after they're diagnosed with ADHD, for instance, right? Like, and I kept telling myself, well, there are parents who have kids who are dying of cancer. So why am I upset? Right. Again, discounting my own experience and telling myself that I don't have the right to have emotion around this thing.
Right.
And I had to learn to do better than that for myself. Right. But
Yeah.
it is very hard when everything feels hard and difficult and upsetting and outside of our control to manage our energy. We just keep giving it to all of these things because we're not moving with intention. We're just on autopilot.
Yeah.
If you're in a place where you're moving from crisis to crisis, which so many of the parents that I talk to and coach, that's exactly where they are when they go online and book a coaching call, right? They're like, I can't do this just one crisis to the next anymore.
Yep.
And part of that is our mindset, but a lot of that is just managing our energy. I can keep giving all of this emotion and energy to like the fact that my kid is struggling with handwriting and his peers don't, or I can say, okay, what can I do there, and where can I just stop giving my energy to this because it's not working? Because there's so many places we can give that energy to that are going to be helpful.
Well, and this is the other piece of it. It's not arrogant to know
Mm,
yourself and to control is the wrong word, but to modify your thinking to fit
mhm.
the environment and your needs. That's not arrogance, that's self knowledge and self
Yes.
mastery.
Yes. And let me also add a layer to that,
Mm.
because when we do that for ourselves, it helps everyone around us. When we are stuck in that negative quicksand and we are just spinning and spinning and spinning, everyone around us is getting that energy and it is affecting them.
I feel that. I have full body chills right now. You nailed it. I
Mm.
really like,
Took
oh,
me so many years to figure that out. So many
right.
years. Oh my God, I was obsessed. All I talked about was ADHD. All I thought about was ADHD. My husband started walking in the door and avoiding me because he didn't want to hear about it all the time. Like, my kids were like, can you talk about anything else? Like, I had to come to the realization of where I was and that it was actually harming. I was trying to fix things, right? My intention was I got to be so helpful for everyone. And actually, I was being less helpful. I was dragging them down worse
Yeah,
than the reality of our situation was. It's a
yeah.
big deal.
It's a big effing deal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Patty Williams, if people want to find out more about you, work with you, how do they do that?
The easiest thing to do is to go to parentingadhdandautism.com.
Yep.
Everything is linked up there. You can find me on the Beautifully Complex podcast, which is getting back to weekly now. I had a little hiatus there with the storm, but I'm starting to sort of get back on somewhat of a normal schedule and trajectory there. Coaching, online parenting courses, all that good stuff can all be found there.
Thank you so much for coming
Thank
and
you.
sharing your story and these important insights for folks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I always enjoy it.